Good morning. Happy Sunday. Today we are continuing our Knowing Jesus in a New Way story. And if you don't remember where we left off, that's okay. These stories are so wonderful because we always go back to the first card that we have seen. And it just helps us remember what happened before. And it helps us just to hold that in our heart so we can think of how it is connected to the story that we are going to hear for today. Known in absence. The three Marys came to the tomb, and when they got there, they noticed that the stone had been rolled away, and Jesus' body was gone. And he was really gone, but they could feel his presence, even in the absence. And they went to tell the others, and most did not believe them, but Peter and perhaps John came back. And when they saw what the Marys had already seen, they also went back to tell others, but Mary Magdalene stayed. And she began to weep. And she saw someone, and a voice asked, "Woman, why are you weeping? Tell me where they have taken him, so I will know where to go." Mary. This time, she knew who the stranger was. Mary must have stepped forward, because Jesus said, "No, you cannot hold me, for I have risen, but I have not yet ascended." Known in the breaking of bread. There were two people walking along the road to Emmaus. And it was some 7 miles from Jerusalem. They must have been shaking their heads, thinking about all that had happened. The cross, the empty tomb. What did it all mean? Then a stranger joined them. At first they didn't think much of it. But the stranger asked, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "How could you not know all that has happened in Jerusalem? There has been so much." And the stranger opened the scriptures to them. "Do you remember how we were trapped in Egypt? Moses led us out of the water into freedom. Do you remember how we were trapped in the desert? God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Do you remember how we were trapped in exile? And the prophet said a child would lead us, and someone would come to suffer and die so that we might really be alive." By this time, the miles had passed so quickly, and the two men who had been walking asked the stranger to stay with them to have supper together. And that stranger said yes. And when he broke the bread, he gave thanks to God. And that's when they knew who he really was. And they sat at that table for a long time talking. And they got up slowly. And they hurried back to Jerusalem to tell everyone, because their hearts burned. And they knew why now that their hearts had been burning. Known in doubt. The disciples gathered in the room where they had had the Last Supper that they had had with Jesus. And they gathered with the doors shut because they were afraid that soldiers would come and take them, just like soldiers had come to take Jesus. And as they were meeting, they heard someone say, "Peace be with you." They looked, and they saw that it was he. At first they thought he was a ghost, but then he talked with them. They saw the wounds on his hands. And he ate a piece of fish, and he opened the scriptures just like he had on the road to Emmaus. And finally he said, "Peace be with you," and he was gone. Now Thomas had been away that night, and when they told him what had happened the next day, he did not believe them. He had doubt in his bones. And why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he have some doubt? Their minds were stretching and growing to know Jesus in this new way. 8 days passed, and the disciples again went up into the same room, and this time Thomas was there, and a voice said, "Peace be with you." And this time Thomas went right up and held out his hand. "Touch me." And all Thomas could do was fall to his knees. "My Lord, my God." Jesus looked at him a long time and said, "Do you believe because you have seen? Blessed are those who believe without seeing." Known in the morning. That morning, as the sky was turning pink to blue, Peter and John went fishing, and they could see smoke blowing from a fire. "Have you caught anything?" And all they could say was no. And they heard, "Throw your nets on the other side." And what could they lose? So they did. But they could feel the fish moving, but John was not paying attention to the fish. He leaned forward and he watched the man on the shore. And he said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And Peter stood up. He jumped. He swam. And he felt the sand under his feet as he walked to the shore. The others turned the boat toward the land, and the nets were so full that they could not pull them in. And when they got closer, they knew that this stranger was not a stranger, and that it was Jesus. And Peter heard him say, "Do you love me?" "Yes, of course." "Then feed my lambs." "Do you love me?" "You know that I do." "Then feed my sheep." "Do you love me?" "You already know I do." "Then feed my sheep." And Peter got up, and the two of them walked. They walked along the shoreline, and Peter looked back, and he saw John, and he said, "Will this man die like the rest of us?" And Jesus said, "It is not for you to know such things." And Peter fell silent. Known in making him known. The disciples gathered together in Galilee, and they went to the mountain to meet Jesus. he was already there. It was so good to see him in this new way. Listen, he was talking again. What was that? All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. What was he talking about? He said something that they could understand, but they didn't want to do. Go everywhere. Tell my story, even this part, to everyone. Show them how to be good disciples. Tell them the story so that they can be part of it. And baptize them. Baptize them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and in the Holy Spirit. This was far too much travel, and this was too much to do. And then in their dismay, he said, I am with you always to the end of the age. And then he was gone. As they walked back to Jerusalem, they knew they had been followers, but now they were leaders. They had been sheep, but now they had to be shepherds. They had come home for the last time, and now they were to make a home for others. Known in waiting. We remember how the disciples returned to Jerusalem. They gathered again in their room, and Jesus was there. They were getting more comfortable in knowing Jesus in this new way, and so they asked him many questions. Most of them were foolish. Lord, will you restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus cut that talk short and said, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons. Then he led them out of the room and through the streets, and they went beyond the wall of Jerusalem to a hillside, perhaps near Bethany. And Jesus stopped, and he gathered around, and then he blessed each one of them. Then he withdrew, and a cloud took him out of sight. The disciples looked into the sky, and then someone must have said, why are you looking at the sky? And there were two men standing there, and they were dressed in white. The disciples felt silly. Why were they looking at the sky? What were they doing? Looking up at the sky, and what are they looking for? They could no longer see. The strangers then answered their own questions. That was Jesus, and he has gone now, as you have known him. And it felt like a great weight had been lifted off of their shoulders. The disciples turned and they walked back to Jerusalem. Now they had to wait. What was this the Holy Spirit said was coming? And how would they know when the Holy Spirit arrived? While they waited, they found someone to replace Judas so they could become 12 again. But they still had to keep waiting. How long would it take the Holy Spirit to come? Now, I wonder what you have around you that reminds you of anything that you heard in those stories. There's a lot of ways to know Jesus in a new way. And I imagine that it was probably really hard for those disciples to imagine Jesus in new ways. This week, we will be celebrating the Ascension, which is what you saw in this picture. So in the email this week, you will see some activities that you could do to celebrate that very special day. Because after the Ascension, something special is going to happen. And I can't wait to see what it's going to be.